My past was a heavy cloak I wore, carefully folded and hidden away. It was filled with moments I rarely spoke of, wounds that still ached deep inside me. I always believed that one day, when I was truly ready, I would share my journey. It would be on my own terms, a way to heal and perhaps help others who had faced similar struggles. For now, it was just mine, a secret kept close to my heart. Then came the day I decided to trust Lily, my younger sister. She had always seemed so understanding, so eager to listen, a safe harbor for my thoughts. We sat in her cozy living room, and I began to speak about things I had never voiced aloud to anyone. I believed in our bond, in the safety of her presence. I shared the rawest parts of my story, hoping for comfort, not judgment. As I spoke, Lily listened with an intense focus. Her eyes were fixed on me, almost too steady. Sometimes her hand would dip into her bag, pulling out a small, plain notebook. She would jot down a few quick words, then quickly put it away again. She called them memory aids for her own thoughts, she said. I didn't think much of it then, caught up in my own vulnerability. After those conversations, a temporary sense of relief washed over me. It felt good to finally unburden myself, even if it was just to Lily. I felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was completely unaware of the insidious plan forming in her mind, a plan that would turn my pain into something I could never have imagined. I simply felt a fragile peace. Hints of Lily's burgeoning literary ambitions started to surface in our family interactions. She would talk about her craft and her stories with a new intensity. There was a competitive edge in her voice, especially when she spoke about other writers. I saw a manipulative glint in her eye sometimes, a desire to be the best, no matter the cost. I dismissed it as typical sibling rivalry. Then I started to notice small, unusual questions from Lily. She would ask about obscure details of my past, things I had mentioned only briefly, or even things I hadn't shared at all. What was the exact color of the car that day? She might ask, or how did that particular smell make you feel in that moment? It made me subtly uneasy, a prickle of discomfort I couldn't quite place. As weeks passed, Lily became increasingly withdrawn. She spent hours hidden away in her room, tapping away at her laptop. She was secretive about her writing projects, dismissing my inquiries with vague answers. Just working on something, she'd say, waving me off. Her closed-off nature felt different now, more guarded, and it added to my growing sense of unease. I tried to dismiss my growing unease. I told myself I was overthinking things, that it was just my own protective instincts kicking in. My past had taught me to be cautious, to guard my vulnerabilities. I reasoned that Lily was simply an aspiring writer, caught up in her own creative world. I pushed down the small voice of doubt that whispered in the back of my mind, wanting to believe the best. One afternoon, I ran into Clara, one of Lily's closest friends, at a local coffee shop. We chatted for a moment, and then Clara mentioned Lily. "Oh, she's been so busy," Clara said, her voice full of admiration. "Working on something big and incredibly personal," she told me. "Something that will change everything for her." The words hit me like a small, cold wave. A flicker of concern sparked within me. After that conversation, I began to feel a subtle distance growing between Lily and me. It wasn't just her secrecy, it was a shift in her demeanor, a new aloofness. I felt a premonition, a quiet dread that an unspoken truth was lurking beneath the surface, something she was keeping from me. The warmth of our bond seemed to be fading, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. The whispers started subtly at first, like a distant hum. News of Lily's debut novel, Echoes in the Silence, began to spread through our small town. I heard snippets from neighbors and friends talk of its raw honesty and compelling narrative. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just another fictional story about overcoming hardship, perhaps vaguely inspired by general themes. My own past felt too unique, too deeply buried to ever be mistaken for common fiction. I believed my story was still safe with me. Then the hum grew louder, turning into a roar. Echoes in the Silence wasn't just doing well, it was a phenomenon. My phone buzzed with notifications about Lily's interviews, critical acclaim, and even early awards buzz. People spoke of it with reverence, calling it a masterpiece. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I told myself it was just sibling pride, maybe a touch of envy, but deep down, a faint alarm bell began to ring. I still resisted the urge to look closer. One afternoon, my friend Sarah called, her voice urgent. "Ilara, have you read Lily's book?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. "You have to. Some parts, they sound so much like things you've told me." My heart gave a sudden lurch. I tried to dismiss her, to say it was impossible, but her insistence chipped away at my denial. A cold dread began to creep in. I knew then that I had to read it. I bought the book that evening. My hands trembled as I opened it, the first few pages feeling innocuous enough. But as I continued, a creeping horror began to set in. A character, a young girl, faced a situation eerily similar to my own childhood. My breath hitched. It couldn't be, I thought. It must be a coincidence. Yet the details felt too precise, too personal to be random. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. I kept reading, my eyes scanning each word, each sentence with growing disbelief. The horror intensified with every turning page. Specific phrases, unique situations, even exact dialogue from my past, things I had only ever confided in Lily, leaped out at me. A particular blue car, the smell of damp earth on a specific day, a peculiar scar on a minor character's hand. These were not general themes. They were mine, stolen and laid bare. The chilling realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't inspired by. This was my life. My profound personal trauma, meticulously guarded for years, was now a thinly veiled, verbatim account, fictionalized just enough to avoid direct accusation, yet unmistakable to anyone who knew me. Every agonizing detail, every vulnerable moment I had shared with Lily was now a marketable story. My stomach churned with a mix of disbelief and utter revulsion. I confronted Lily, my voice trembling with a rage I barely recognized. "How could you?" I demanded, holding up her book. She met my gaze with a calm, almost pitying look. "It's fiction, Ilara," she said, her voice smooth, too smooth. "Creative inspiration. You know how writers work." She gaslighted me, denying the theft, claiming I was imagining things, letting my overactive imagination get the better of me. Her words were like knives, twisting the wound deeper. The family, blinded by Lily's sudden fame and fortune, sided with her. My parents, beaming with pride over their successful author-daughter, dismissed my anguish. "You're just jealous, Ilara," my mother sighed, her voice laced with disappointment. "Or perhaps your past is making you see things." Their words cut me to the core, leaving me feeling utterly alone and misunderstood. My own family, my supposed safe haven, had abandoned me for a lie. The re-traumatization was immediate and brutal. Acquaintances and even strangers started to look at me differently, their gazes lingering, their whispers following me. They recognized my story, or rather, Lily's version of it. I felt exposed, stripped bare, my deepest wounds paraded for public consumption. I tried to seek legal counsel, but lawyers were skeptical. "It's a work of fiction, ma'am," they'd say. Proving intellectual theft of a life story is incredibly difficult. Shattered and publicly humiliated, I retreated into myself, the world outside feeling too sharp, too cruel. The profound disillusionment settled over me like a heavy shroud. But amidst the crushing pain, something cold and hard began to solidify within me. The tears stopped, replaced by a quiet, burning resolve. My narrative had been stolen, commodified, and twisted. Now I would take it back, no matter the cost. Lily had no idea what she had unleashed. The world seemed to shrink around me. Every magazine cover, every TV segment featuring Lily felt like a fresh wound. People I barely knew would approach me with a knowing look, a sympathetic glance that felt like an invasion. My private agony was now public spectacle, my identity reduced to a plot point. I felt like a ghost haunting my own stolen story, my pain turned into entertainment for strangers. It was an unbearable weight. Lily, meanwhile, glowed in the spotlight. I saw her on morning shows, her voice soft and earnest, talking about the deeply personal journey that inspired her novel. She spoke of courage and resilience, words that once belonged to me. Each interview felt like a betrayal, a calculated performance designed to validate her lie. She was using my deepest vulnerabilities, my most intimate moments, as currency for her fame, twisting our shared past into a narrative of her own making. I tried to tell my side, to whisper the truth to anyone who would listen. I reached out to a local reporter, hoping to expose the theft, but my words were twisted, my anguish dismissed as jealousy. Just a bitter sibling, I heard one family friend say. Lily's public relations machine was efficient, painting me as unstable, envious. My attempts to reclaim my voice were silenced before they could even begin, buried under a mountain of carefully crafted lies. The worst part was my own family. They celebrated Lily's genius with an almost aggressive enthusiasm. Family gatherings became unbearable. My parents would beam with pride, showing off her latest award, completely oblivious to the pain etched on my face. My siblings praised her talent, never once asking how I felt, never acknowledging the gaping wound she had inflicted. Their indifference, their cheerful complicity, felt like a second, deeper betrayal. One night I sat alone in the dark, the silence heavy around me. The realization crashed over me, cold and absolute. My pain, my deepest, most agonizing experiences, had been remorselessly pilfered, twisted, commodified for profit. Lily had built her empire on my suffering, turning my wounds into a bestseller. It was a violation so profound, so personal, that it left me hollowed out, stripped of all hope. I felt utterly, completely broken. But then something shifted. The despair, so heavy moments before, began to solidify, to harden. A cold, quiet fury started to simmer beneath the surface. It wasn't the hot, blinding rage I had felt when I first confronted Lily. This was different. This was calculated. This was an unyielding desire for justice, a burning need for vindication. My pain would not be her legacy. I would reclaim my narrative, no matter what it took. The next morning, I began my research. I spent hours poring over articles on intellectual property law, studying cases of narrative theft. I delved into the psychology of manipulation, trying to understand how Lily had so skillfully twisted facts and gaslighted me. I became a detective of my own trauma, meticulously piecing together every detail, every interaction, searching for weaknesses in her carefully constructed facade. I would learn her game. My apartment became a war room. I unearthed old journals filled with my raw, unfiltered thoughts. I scrolled through years of emails and text messages, searching for any mention, any hint. That proved Lily knew the true source of her story. I even tried to recall childhood conversations, looking for moments where I might have shared details that only she would have remembered. Every scrap of information was a potential weapon, a piece of the truth. I started to pull away from family gatherings. My excuses were vague, my presence increasingly rare. I needed to operate in complete secrecy, to become an invisible presence while I planned my moves. They were still blinded by Lily's fame, still unwilling to see the truth. I couldn't risk them interfering, or worse, reporting my actions back to her. My strategy required isolation, a quiet, methodical approach. Finally, I took my first step. It was small, almost imperceptible. I posted a seemingly innocuous comment online, hidden deep within a forum related to Lily's book. It contained a specific phrase, a detail so obscure and personal that only she would recognize its true meaning. It was a whisper of the coming storm, a subtle hint that I was watching, that I was coming for her. The game had begun. I spent hours now, deep in my apartment. It was no longer a war room, but a quiet library of truth. I laid out my old journals next to Lily's book. Page by page, I found the echoes. A date in my diary, a matching event in her story, a specific detail from my memory mirrored word for word. Each connection felt like a cold, hard stone settling in my stomach. This was not coincidence. This was theft. My resolve grew stronger with every match I found. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing the truth was undeniable. Finding the right lawyer felt like searching for a hidden path. Most dismissed me. Then I found him, Mr. Davies. He was known for taking on impossible cases. His office was cluttered, but his eyes were sharp. I laid out my evidence piece by painful piece. He listened, nodding slowly without judgment. He saw not just a story, but a violation. He understood the unique nature of my pain. A small seed of hope began to sprout, fragile but real. I felt less alone in this fight. With Mr. Davies's help, a plan began to form. It wasn't just about legal papers. It was bigger. We talked about public relations, about how to tell my side of the story when the time was right. We even discussed subtle ways to expose Lily's deceit without revealing everything at once. This felt like a complex game of chess. I knew it would be slow, but each step was carefully thought out. My heart felt a cold determination, replacing the old, raw hurt. At first, I just wanted to expose Lily, to scream the truth. But now, my goal had shifted. It wasn't enough to just say she stole my story. I wanted to dismantle her carefully built image. Her originality, her integrity, those were the lies I needed to break. I wanted to show the world that her success was built on stolen ground. This felt like a deep, surgical strike aimed at the very core of her false identity. It was a cold, calculated hunger for true justice. I started with small acts, almost like whispers in the dark. I sent anonymous messages online to forums where Lily's book was discussed. I mentioned tiny, obscure details from my past, things only she would know I knew. Remember the specific shade of green on that old bicycle? I might type. Or the sound of the wind chimes on that particular afternoon was unforgettable. I imagined her reading them, a flicker of unease crossing her face. It was a test, a way to sow seeds of doubt and paranoia. I felt a strange sense of power. I began watching Lily's interviews with a new, critical eye. Her voice was calm, her smile bright, but I listened for inconsistencies. How she described her inspiration, the way she dodged certain questions. I looked for cracks in her story, vulnerabilities I could exploit later. It was like studying an enemy's movements before a battle. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, was now a piece of data for me to analyze. I felt a growing sense of detachment, a necessary shield. I also started to look for others who might have seen through Lily's facade. Online, I found comments from people who questioned the truth of her novel or expressed vague doubts about her character. I reached out carefully, anonymously at first, hinting at a deeper story. Some were skeptical, but others were curious. I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing I wasn't the only one who sensed the lie. These small connections were like building blocks, piece by piece. This fight would be long and hard. I knew I needed to be strong, not just mentally, but emotionally. I started to meditate to practice detaching myself from the raw pain. I imagined the backlash, the accusations, and built walls around my heart. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about strategy. I needed to be calm, clear-headed, and resilient. My own well-being became a weapon in itself. I felt a quiet strength settling within me. Slowly, subtly, I began to see the effects of my actions. Lily's public appearances seemed a little less polished. In an interview, she stumbled over a question about her creative process. At a book signing, she snapped at an assistant. Small things, but noticeable to someone watching closely. I imagined the anonymous whispers, the obscure hints gnawing at her. She was sensing a threat, an unseen enemy, and it was making her unravel bit by bit. A grim satisfaction tightened in my chest. The time felt right. I had gathered enough. A single, irrefutable piece of evidence. A faded photograph, a date, a specific detail that matched my life, not hers. I chose a niche online investigative platform, known for its deep dives and credibility. Anonymously, I sent it, with a short, cryptic message hinting at the true story behind echoes in the silence. It was a controlled explosion, the first public crack in her perfect facade. I knew this would be the beginning of the end for her, and the true start of my reclamation. The storm was finally breaking. The small online comment I had left, a mere whisper, began to grow. I saw it first on a niche forum, then on social media. People were talking, asking questions about echoes in the silence. There were debates, theories, and a slow, creeping doubt about Lily's story. My heart beat a little faster. It was like watching a tiny spark become a flicker, then a small flame. I felt a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. The truth was starting to breathe on its own. Soon, the whispers weren't just online chatter. Major literary critics, those who had praised Lily, started to write articles with cautious questions. Investigative journalists, known for digging deep, began their own quiet inquiries. I saw their headlines, their careful words. They were looking at the striking similarities, the details I had hinted at. My plan was working, slowly, methodically. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath Lily's feet, even if she didn't know it yet. Lily's public appearances started to change. Her bright smile seemed a little more forced. Her answers to questions about her inspiration became vague, defensive. I watched her on TV, her eyes darting, her voice losing its smooth confidence. Her carefully built image, once so polished, was beginning to fray. It was a small victory, seeing her squirm, but it also reminded me of her deep-seated deceit. I knew she was feeling the pressure. I knew this was the moment to push harder. With Mr. Davies, I carefully chose the next pieces of evidence. Not everything, just enough. A dated photograph, a specific location, a detail that was undeniably mine, not hers. We timed their release anonymously to hit when the online debate was at its peak. Each piece was like a hammer blow, eroding her credibility, making her vague answers sound like outright lies. I felt a cold, focused determination. The public reaction was dramatic. Initial sympathy for Lily, the struggling artist, turned quickly to outrage. Comments online became scathing. Fraud, exploiter, liar, these words filled my screen. It was a strange feeling, seeing strangers so angry on my behalf. A wave of vindication washed over me, but it also brought a fresh pang of exposure. My pain was now a public spectacle, but at least the truth was finally out there. Then came the news about her publishing house. They issued a statement, vague at first, then more direct. They were reviewing the allegations, initiating internal investigations. Their fear of reputational damage, of potential lawsuits, was clear. They began to distance themselves from Lily, pulling her book from some shelves, canceling her appearances. This was a significant blow, hitting her where her ambition truly lay. I knew this would hurt her deeply. The evidence became undeniable, even for my family. The calls started, frantic and accusatory. My parents, once so proud, were now ashamed, confused. They were forced to confront Lily's betrayal and their own complicity in dismissing my pain. Family gatherings shattered. Relatives stood apart, whispering, their faces etched with discomfort. The happy facade of our family, built on Lily's lie, crumbled, exposing the raw, painful truth beneath. Lily's desperate attempts to control the narrative only made things worse. Her PR team launched aggressive campaigns, threatening legal action against anyone who spoke out. But it backfired spectacularly. She looked more guilty, more desperate. The public saw through it, fueling the outrage. Her attempts to silence the truth only amplified it, like shouting into a storm. I watched her unravel, a grim satisfaction settling in my heart. Through it all, I maintained my calm. I spoke rarely, but when I did, my voice was steady and pathetic. I presented myself as a survivor, a person who had been deeply wronged, seeking only truth and vindication. Though the scars of my trauma still ached, I showed no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet resolve. I knew this composed public persona was my strength, a stark contrast to Lily's increasingly frantic denials. It was a powerful weapon. The legal challenges mounted against Lily. Lawsuits from readers, from other authors whose work she had subtly borrowed, began to pile up. Her once glorious career was teetering on the brink, about to collapse entirely. The fame and fortune she had built on my pain were now her undoing. I watched her fall, piece by piece, knowing that the final, devastating blow was yet to come. I was ready to deliver it, to reclaim my narrative once and for all. The headlines exploded. Not just whispers anymore, but shouts. The full truth of Lily's audacious betrayal was everywhere. Major media outlets condemned her, their words sharp and clear. I saw her name, once celebrated, now synonymous with fraud. It was a strange feeling to witness, this public downfall. A part of me felt a cold satisfaction, but another part just felt tired. My story, once stolen, was now a public spectacle, but at least it was finally being told correctly. Lily's once illustrious career collapsed completely. Her awards, once shining symbols of her supposed genius, were questioned, some even rescinded. Her book sales plummeted overnight. Her reputation, carefully built on my suffering, was irrevocably destroyed. I watched from a distance as her world crumbled. The fame she had chased so relentlessly, the fortune she had amassed, now turned to dust. It was a stark reminder of the cost of deceit. Then came my turn. I sat down for a national interview, my voice steady, my heart pounding. I finally reclaimed my story, speaking not with anger but with a quiet strength. I shared my journey on my own terms, turning my trauma into a platform for advocacy. It was terrifying, yet liberating. I felt the weight of years of silence lift, replaced by a powerful sense of purpose. This was my voice, finally heard, not just for me but for others. The legal consequences for Lily were severe. Substantial financial penalties were imposed, a small comfort for the immense pain she had caused. She lost all rights to her book, the very thing she had stolen from me. There were even discussions of potential criminal charges for fraud. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that justice, though slow, was finally served. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle, about the recognition of her profound violation. My family was forced to face their own reckoning. Some publicly acknowledged their complicity in dismissing my pain, their voices filled with shame. Others tried to denounce Lily, but their words rang hollow. Family gatherings became strained, filled with unspoken accusations and uncomfortable silences. The truth had shattered the facade of our family, exposing the deep cracks beneath. It was painful to watch, but necessary. They had to see the truth, too. A profound, bittersweet vindication settled over me. It wasn't a joyful triumph, but a quiet, deep sense of rightness. Not just for myself, but for countless trauma survivors whose narratives have been silenced or exploited. My fight had become their fight, a beacon of hope that one could reclaim what was stolen. I felt a connection to a larger purpose, a responsibility to speak for those who couldn't. This was more than just my victory. The intricate layers of my revenge had come full circle. Every carefully planned step, every subtle hint, every piece of evidence had led to this moment. It revealed the precise cost of Lily's malice, the devastating price she paid for commodifying my suffering. There was a catharsis in reclaiming my stolen identity, in seeing her fall. It wasn't about hatred anymore. It was about restoration. My narrative was finally mine again. With the storm behind me, I embarked on a new journey. It was a journey of healing and advocacy. I used my voice and experiences to champion ethical storytelling, to empower victims, and to raise awareness about the exploitation of trauma. It felt right, a way to transform my pain into purpose. I was no longer just a survivor. I was an advocate, building a future where no one else would suffer as I had. Lily faced the full, isolated consequences of her actions. She was alone, stripped of her fame, her fortune, and her family's respect. There was no one left to defend her, no one to believe her lies. She was left with nothing but the wreckage of her ambition and deceit. I did not gloat, but I felt a quiet certainty that she was finally experiencing the emptiness she had inflicted upon me. Her silence was louder than any of her previous words. Finally, a true peace settled in my heart. I had restored my narrative, and in doing so, I had restored myself. I was finally free from the weaponized intimacy, the gaslighting, and the shadows of my past. The journey had been long and painful, but I had emerged stronger, more whole. The sunset on the horizon felt like a promise of new beginnings, a calm, clear future where my story was truly my own, always.